I have a surprise for our anniversary. My name is Michael. I'm 37, run quality control at North Peak Engineering in Phoenix, and I thought I knew my wife. Melissa had been acting different for months. Not angry different, happy different, too happy. She hummed while doing dishes, bought new clothes, started going to the gym again after 2 years of excuses. Our 10th anniversary was approaching, and she kept mentioning this surprise. The way she said it made my stomach turn, like she was savoring something I wasn't supposed to understand yet. "What kind of surprise?" I asked one evening, watching her apply makeup at 8 p.m. for what she called a book club meeting. "You'll see." She kissed my cheek, leaving a lipstick mark I wiped off after she left. Book club meetings that lasted until midnight, weekend errands that took 4 hours, phone calls she took in the garage. I wasn't stupid, but I also wasn't the type to snoop through her things or follow her around like some jealous husband. I figured if she wanted out, she'd tell me. The surprise came 3 days before our actual anniversary. I got home early from work, around 3 p.m., because a shipment delay killed our afternoon schedule. Melissa's car was in the driveway next to a silver BMW I didn't recognize. I walked through the front door calling her name. No answer. Their voices carried down from upstairs. Melissa's laugh. A man's voice I recognized but couldn't place immediately. I climbed the stairs. Our bedroom door was cracked open. "Michael should be home soon," the man said. "Are you sure about this?" "Trust me," Melissa replied. "It's perfect timing." I pushed the door open wider. They were both dressed, sitting on the edge of our bed like they were waiting for something. Melissa wore the red dress I'd bought her for Christmas. The man was Raymond Torres, the financial advisor she'd introduced me to at a neighborhood barbecue 6 months earlier. Clean-cut guy in his 40s who drove the BMW and talked about investment opportunities. "Surprise," Melissa said, standing up with a smile that made my blood cold. They weren't undressed. They weren't scrambling to cover themselves. They were just sitting there like this was supposed to happen. Like I was supposed to join some conversation I'd walked into the middle of. But the way they looked at each other told me everything. The way Raymond's hand rested on her knee. The way she leaned into him when she laughed. I stood in the doorway for maybe 10 seconds. Neither of them said anything else. Melissa kept smiling like she was proud of herself. I turned around, walked downstairs, grabbed my keys, and left. I drove to the Marriott downtown and checked in for a week. Paid cash, turned off my phone, sat on the bed and stared at the wall until dark. 10 years of marriage. We'd met at Arizona State when I was finishing my engineering degree. She was studying marketing, had big plans for her own consulting business. Smart woman, beautiful woman. The kind who turned heads when she walked into a room. We bought the house in Scottsdale 5 years ago, split everything 50-50 even though my salary at North Peak was higher. She eventually gave up on the consulting idea and worked part-time at a boutique downtown. Said she wanted to focus on us, maybe start a family someday. That someday never came. Every time I brought up kids, she found a reason to wait. More money. Better timing. Her career. My career. Always something. Raymond had appeared at the Hendersons' barbecue last summer. Tom Henderson introduced him as a financial advisor who'd helped their portfolio grow 15% in 6 months. Impressive numbers. Melissa spent most of that evening talking to him about investment strategies. "We should diversify our portfolio," she said on the drive home. "Raymond thinks we're being too conservative." I didn't think much of it. Melissa had always been interested in money, ways to make more of it. She started having coffee with Raymond to discuss our finances, then lunch meetings, then weekend sessions where they'd spread papers across our dining room table and talk about market trends. "He's really helping us," she'd say when I questioned the frequency of their meetings. "You should trust me on this." Trust. The word felt different now, sitting in a hotel room while my wife entertained her lover in our bedroom. The warnings had been there. Phone calls where she'd step outside, credit card charges at restaurants I'd never been to, a gym membership she claimed was for yoga classes, but she never brought home a yoga mat. 3 months ago, Raymond had suggested I introduce him to some of my colleagues at North Peak. Professional networking, he called it. Mutual benefit. I'd given him contact information for 5 guys from work, engineers with decent salaries and retirement funds they wanted to grow. Tom Henderson had recommended Raymond, and the numbers he showed looked legitimate. These are good people, I'd told Raymond when I handed over their information. Don't waste their time unless you can deliver. Of course, he'd said, shaking my hand. I appreciate the trust. That word again. Trust. I ordered room service and ate in silence. Tomorrow I'd start figuring out what came next. The 3rd day at the hotel, I called a private investigator. His name was Frank Sullivan, retired Phoenix police detective who now handled divorce cases and corporate fraud. I found his number online and met him at a diner on Camelback Road. Standard cheating spouse investigation? He asked after I explained the situation. Start there, I said. But I want to know everything, her finances, his business, how long this has been going on, what they're planning. Frank was in his 60s, gray-haired with the tired eyes of someone who'd seen every kind of betrayal. This gonna be one of those cases where you want me to find dirt so you can destroy them? I want the truth. All of it. Truth costs extra. You sure you want to know everything? I nodded. Frank called me 2 days later. We need to meet. Bring a notebook. This time we met at his office, a small space above a coffee shop in Central Phoenix. Frank had 3 manila folders on his desk. Your wife's been having an affair with Raymond Torres for 8 months, he started. But that's not the interesting part. He opened the first folder. Bank statements, investment records, correspondence. Raymond Torres runs a Ponzi scheme. Classic setup. Uses early investors' money to pay fake returns to later investors. Creates appearance of success to attract more victims. My stomach dropped. Your wife knows. She's been recruiting victims through her social connections. Gets a cut of every investment she brings in. 5% commission on initial deposits. Frank opened the second folder. Photos of Melissa meeting with people I recognized. Neighbors. Friends from church. Women from her book club that apparently did exist. She's been working as his recruiter for 6 months. The affair provides cover for their business meetings. Romance keeps them both motivated. The third folder contained the worst news. Remember those colleagues you introduced to Raymond? All 5 invested, total of $430,000 from your contacts alone. The money's gone. Raymond's been paying fake returns with new investor deposits, but the well's running dry. I stared at the documents. Names I recognized. People who trusted my recommendation. How much total? I asked. Estimated $2.3 million from about 40 investors. Your wife's recruitment network brought in roughly 60% of that money. Frank leaned back in his chair. There's more. Raymond's planning to disappear soon. Liquidating assets. Your wife's been helping him move money to offshore accounts. I sat there processing the information. My marriage was over. That hurt. But I'd already accepted it. What made me sick was knowing that people I cared about had lost their savings because they trusted me. What kind of evidence do you have? I asked. Frank smiled. Enough to bury them both. I spent the next day reading through Frank's files, financial records, photographs, recorded phone conversations. The scope of their operation was bigger than I'd imagined. Melissa hadn't just been cheating. She'd been systematically targeting our social circle for financial fraud. The evidence showed Raymond promising 15% annual returns on conservative investments. He used legitimate investment terminology and showed doctored portfolio statements to prove his track record. New investors received their promised returns for the first few months, money that actually came from newer victims. Melissa's role was crucial. She provided credibility and access. When she recommended Raymond to her book club friends or neighbors, they trusted her judgment. When I introduced him to my colleagues, they trusted mine. Frank had recordings of their phone conversations discussing strategy. Michael's engineer friends are perfect, Melissa said in one call. They understand numbers but not finance. Easy targets. Hearing her voice say those words made something break inside me. I called Frank from my hotel room. I want to confront them directly. Set up a meeting. Bad idea, Frank said. You tip them off, they'll run. Raymond's already moving money offshore. You spook them now, your friends never see a dime. Then what do you suggest? Let me keep gathering evidence, another week, maybe two. Then we involve federal authorities. SEC handles investment fraud. FBI handles wire fraud and money laundering. How long before they disappear? Hard to say. But Raymond's been more careful lately. Fewer new investors. More calls to banks in the Cayman Islands. I hung up and stared at the hotel room walls. 2 weeks felt like forever. The next morning, I broke my own rule and drove past the house. Melissa's car was gone. Raymond's BMW sat in my driveway like he owned the place. I parked across the street and called Frank. Change of plans. I'm going to talk to them. Michael, don't... I hung up and walked to my front door. Raymond answered, wearing one of my old Arizona State shirts and holding a cup of coffee. Coffee from my kitchen, made with my coffee maker. Michael. He didn't look surprised. Melissa said you were staying somewhere else. This is still my house. Of course. Come in. The casual way he invited me into my own home made my hands shake. Melissa was at the kitchen table with papers spread out. Financial documents, investor statements. She looked up when I walked in. We need to talk, she said. About what? About our future, about Raymond's business opportunities, about the mistake you made walking out. She said it like I was the one who'd done something wrong. I know about the Ponzi scheme, I said. Raymond's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. Melissa's face went pale. I don't know what you mean, Raymond said. $2.3 million, 40 investors. My colleagues at North Peak lost $400,000 because I vouched for you. Melissa stood up. You don't understand what you're talking about. I understand perfectly. You've been recruiting victims for him, getting paid to destroy our friends' lives. Raymond set down his coffee cup. Michael, you're obviously upset about the marriage situation, but business is business. Your friends made investment decisions as adults, with fraudulent information. If you can prove that, take it to court, Melissa said. Otherwise, you're just making accusations. The coldness in her voice shocked me. This wasn't the woman I'd married. This was someone I'd never met. I want you both out of my house, I said. Raymond smiled. Actually, that's not going to happen. See, legally speaking, this is Melissa's house too. Arizona's a community property state. She has every right to be here. And I have every right to bring my business partner to my home, Melissa added. Business partner. That's what she called him now. I left without another word. They were both smiling when I walked out. Back at the hotel, I called Frank and told him about the confrontation. You gave them a warning, he said. They'll accelerate their timeline now. Good. Let them run. You have enough evidence to prosecute. Maybe. But I found something else. Something bigger. Frank arrived at my hotel room 20 minutes later with a new folder. After you left today, I decided to dig deeper into Raymond's background. Turns out this isn't his first Ponzi scheme. He spread out documents on the small hotel table. Raymond Torres is actually Raymond Terrell. He ran a similar operation in Colorado 3 years ago, defrauded investors out of $1.8 million, fled before prosecution. How's he operating under a different name? False identity, fake social security number, real driver's license and credit history under the Torres name, professional job. Frank opened another section of the folder. But here's the interesting part. Your wife didn't just meet him at a barbecue. She sought him out. Found him through online forums where people discuss investment fraud. She knew exactly who he was. The room felt like it was spinning. Melissa initiated contact with a known fraudster. More than that, she provided startup capital, $25,000 from your joint savings account, took it out in cash withdrawals over 2 months. Raymond used that money to establish credibility with his first few investors. Frank showed me bank statements I'd never seen. Cash withdrawals Melissa had made while I was at work. She's not just a recruiter, she's a partner, equal investor in the fraud. How did you find him? Online research. She'd been studying investment fraud for over a year before she made contact, downloaded guides on how Ponzi schemes work, participated in forums where fraudsters share techniques. Frank pulled out printed web pages. Melissa's user account on fraud forums discussing victim psychology and recruitment strategies. She planned this whole thing. The affair is secondary. Business first, pleasure second. I sat on the hotel bed reading through Melissa's online posts. She'd written detailed analyses of how financial fraud worked, discussed the psychology of victim selection, shared strategies for building trust with potential investors. One post made my blood run cold. The key is using your existing relationships. People who trust you personally will trust your business recommendations without proper due diligence. How long has she been planning this? I asked. Based on her online activity, at least 18 months. She studied multiple fraud cases, learned what worked and what led to prosecution. Then she found Raymond and proposed a partnership. Frank closed the folder. There's something else. They're planning to disappear next week. Booked flights to Mexico under false names. Raymond's been liquidating his remaining assets. They think you'll take a few months to figure out the scope of the fraud. They're running together. Partners in crime, partners in escape. The affair was probably part of the business plan. Easier to coordinate illegal activities when you're romantically involved. I stood up and walked to the hotel window. Phoenix stretched out below me, city lights marking neighborhoods where our victims lived. People who'd trusted Melissa and me. What's the timeline for federal prosecution? If we turn over evidence tomorrow, they might issue warrants within a week. But Raymond and Melissa will be gone by then. Unless we move faster? Frank nodded. I have enough evidence to destroy them both, but we need to be smart about how we do it. What do you recommend? Let them think they're safe, then hit them with everything at once. Public exposure, federal charges, asset seizure, complete destruction. Do it. Frank and I spent the next 2 days planning the takedown. We needed to move fast, but we also needed to ensure maximum impact. The key is coordination, Frank explained. Hit them from multiple directions simultaneously. They can't run if they're dealing with immediate crises. Step 1 was documenting everything. Frank had already compiled comprehensive evidence of the Ponzi scheme, but we needed additional proof of Melissa's leadership role. He'd installed surveillance equipment outside the house and recorded their planning conversations. Step 2 was protecting the victims. Frank contacted the SEC and FBI, providing preliminary evidence to start official investigations. Federal agencies moved slowly, but they could freeze assets once they had probable cause. Step 3 was the public exposure. Frank had connections with investigative journalists at the Arizona Republic. Financial fraud involving local victims was exactly the kind of story they loved. We'll coordinate releases, Frank said. Federal agencies serve warrants, newspaper publishes investigation, and you deliver the final blow. What's the final blow? Frank smiled. You'll see. We scheduled everything for Thursday morning. Raymond and Melissa had booked flights to Mexico for Friday evening. They thought they had one more day to finalize their escape. Thursday morning at 6 a.m., FBI agents knocked on my front door. Frank and I watched from across the street as they served search warrants and arrested Raymond and Melissa. Both were led away in handcuffs while agents carried boxes of evidence from the house. At 8 a.m., the Arizona Republic published a front-page story titled "Local Couple Defrauds Investors of Millions in Ponzi Scheme." The article included photos of Raymond and Melissa, details of their operation, and quotes from victims who'd lost their life savings. At 10 a.m., the SEC announced a civil enforcement action seeking full asset recovery and restitution for victims. But Frank's final blow came at noon. He'd prepared sealed packages for delivery to every victim of the fraud. Each package contained complete documentation of how they'd been targeted, evidence of Raymond and Melissa's criminal partnership, and proof that the affair had been part of their business strategy. The packages also included something else: copies of Melissa's online posts discussing victim psychology and recruitment techniques. I was sitting in the hotel lobby when Frank called. "Packages delivered," he said. 43 victims now have complete evidence of how they were conned, including your 5 colleagues. How are they reacting? Check your phone. I'd turned on my phone for the first time in a week. 37 missed calls, dozens of text messages. Tom Henderson from work. Michael, just got the package. Can't believe Melissa planned this whole thing. Are you okay? Janet Morrison from the neighborhood. Saw the news. So sorry you went through this. Melissa fooled all of us. Dave Collins from North Peak Engineering. Got the evidence package. Want you to know we don't blame you. You were a victim too. The messages kept coming. Anger at Raymond and Melissa, sympathy for me, gratitude for Frank's investigation. But the most important message came from Frank. Turn on Channel 12 News. I found a television in the hotel bar. The noon news was broadcasting live from the Maricopa County Jail. Raymond and Melissa were being led into the courthouse for their arraignment hearing. Melissa looked directly into the camera as reporters shouted questions. Her face was pale, her carefully styled hair disheveled. The confident woman who'd smiled while betraying me was gone. Raymond kept his head down, but I could see the fear in his eyes. The reporter announced they were being held without bail pending federal trial. The judge had determined they were flight risks based on evidence of planned escape to Mexico. I watched my wife disappear into the courthouse and felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. The trial lasted 3 months. Frank's evidence was overwhelming. Financial records, recorded conversations, online posts, victim testimonies, and proof of the planned escape to Mexico. I testified for 2 days, explaining how I'd unknowingly helped Melissa and Raymond target my colleagues. The prosecutor made it clear I was a victim, not a co-conspirator. Melissa's defense attorney tried to blame everything on Raymond, claiming she'd been manipulated and coerced. But her own online posts destroyed that argument. The jury saw her detailed plans for psychological manipulation of victims. Raymond's attorney claimed the investments were legitimate but poorly managed. The evidence of fake portfolio statements and offshore money transfers made that defense impossible. The federal prosecutor was relentless. This wasn't a crime of passion or desperation, she told the jury. This was a calculated, systematic destruction of trust and financial security. The defendants studied their victims, exploited personal relationships, and planned their escape when the scheme collapsed. Victim impact statements filled an entire day. 43 people described losing retirement savings, children's college funds, and money meant for medical expenses. Several victims were my colleagues from North Peak Engineering. Dave Collins addressed the court directly. I trusted Michael's recommendation because I trusted Michael. Melissa and Raymond weaponized that friendship to steal my family's future. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. Wire fraud, securities fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, and identity theft. Melissa received 12 years in federal prison. Raymond received 15 years as the scheme's primary operator. The judge ordered complete asset forfeiture and restitution to victims, though most of the money was already gone. I stood outside the courthouse watching Melissa being led away in handcuffs. She looked at me once, her face empty of the confidence she'd shown that day in our bedroom. Raymond refused to make eye contact with anyone. Frank joined me on the courthouse steps. How do you feel? Empty, I said, but clean. The victims recovered about 30 cents on every dollar through asset forfeiture. Not much, but something. My colleagues at North Peak eventually forgave me, understanding I'd been deceived too. I sold the house in Scottsdale. Too many memories of betrayal. Bought a smaller place in Tempe, closer to work, with no room for anyone but me. Melissa's book club friends and neighbors learned the truth from news coverage and Frank's evidence packages. They'd all been targeted for recruitment at various times. The revelation that their friend had systematically evaluated them as potential fraud victims destroyed any sympathy they might have felt. 6 months after the trial, I received a letter from Melissa in federal prison. She wanted to explain herself, claimed she'd been in love with Raymond and had made mistakes. I threw the letter away without reading past the first paragraph. Frank and I stayed in touch. He'd moved on to other cases, but he checked in occasionally to see how I was handling everything. You did the right thing, he told me during one of our coffee meetings. A lot of men would have just walked away and let the victim suffer. I returned to work at North Peak Engineering. The company supported me throughout the investigation and trial. My colleagues treated me with respect, understanding I'd been as deceived as anyone. Melissa and Raymond faced the full consequences of their systematic betrayal when their Ponzi scheme collapsed under federal investigation. Melissa served 12 years in federal prison while watching her reputation crumble, as news coverage detailed how she had coldly calculated the psychological manipulation of friends and neighbors for financial gain. Her book club friends, neighbors, and social circle completely ostracized her when they learned she had systematically evaluated them as potential fraud victims, treating their trust and friendship as business opportunities rather than genuine relationships. Raymond received 15 years in federal prison and faced additional charges when investigators discovered his previous Colorado fraud scheme, adding 5 more years to his sentence, while his financial advisor license was permanently revoked. Both lost their homes, cars, and all assets through federal forfeiture proceedings, leaving them with nothing but legal debt and destroyed reputations when they were eventually released. The 43 victims pursued civil litigation against both defendants, ensuring that any future earnings would be garnished for restitution payments. Melissa's family disowned her after learning the extent of her calculated deception, while Raymond's professional network in the financial industry blacklisted him permanently. Their affair, which had seemed like a romantic partnership, became evidence of criminal conspiracy that extended their prison sentences and eliminated any possibility of future financial recovery. Walking away from that courthouse, I realized that Melissa's betrayal had taught me something valuable about the difference between trust and verification. In marriage, in friendship, and in business, real integrity means protecting those who rely on your judgment, not exploiting their confidence for personal gain. You're recording me again. My name is Richie. I'm 42, been running Bright Path Logistics in Memphis, Tennessee for 8 years. Built it from nothing after my dad passed and left me his old delivery truck. That truck became 5 trucks, then 15, then a whole fleet serving the Mid-South. Stephanie had been acting strange for months, little things. Her phone always face down during dinner, conversations that stopped when I walked into rooms. The way she'd position herself during our arguments like she was performing for an invisible audience. "I'm not recording anything," she said, but her hand moved toward her purse. Always that purse, never more than 3 feet away from her lately. We'd been married 7 years. Met when she was working at a law office downtown, bright and ambitious. Said she wanted to be more than just a paralegal someday. I supported that dream. Paid for her to go back to school part-time, helped her study for the LSAT twice. Now she spent her days browsing real estate websites and talking to lawyers. Said she was exploring options for her career. But real estate agents don't usually ask about business valuations and asset protection strategies. "Why don't we go out for dinner tonight?" I suggested. "That Italian place you used to love." "Used to," she repeated like she was testing how the word sounded. "Everything's used to with you, isn't it, Richie? Used to be happy, used to have plans, used to care about what I wanted." The conversation felt scripted, rehearsed, like she'd practiced this exact exchange in front of a mirror. I walked to my home office and pulled up the security system dashboard on my computer. 6 months ago, after a break-in at the warehouse, I'd upgraded our whole security setup. House, business, everything connected to one system. Motion sensors, cameras, audio recording in common areas. The insurance company gave us a decent discount for it. The system showed everything was functioning normally. All cameras active, all audio feeds clear. I'd installed it myself, running cables through the attic over 3 weekends. Stephanie had complained about the cost, said it was overkill for our quiet neighborhood. But watching the real-time feeds now, I noticed something. The living room camera showed Stephanie moving around downstairs, and every few minutes she'd glance directly at where she thought the camera was mounted. Only problem was she was looking at the wrong spot. The actual camera was hidden behind a decorative plant, angled to capture the entire room without being obvious. She was definitely recording something, and apparently she thought I was too stupid to figure it out. I'd always been the steady one, After Dad's heart attack, Mom needed someone to handle his affairs while she grieved. The trucking business was barely breaking even, but it was all we had. I worked 16-hour days for 2 years, learning routes, building relationships, fighting to keep contracts that bigger companies wanted to steal. Stephanie was proud of me then. Bragged to her friends about her entrepreneur husband. Posted pictures of our new trucks on social media with captions about building dreams together. We talked about kids, maybe buying some land outside the city where we could raise them right. Those conversations stopped around the time the business really took off. Success changed something between us. Not the money itself, but what it represented. Stephanie started mentioning other couples who did things differently. Wives who got more involved in business decisions. Wives who had their names on everything. "Why isn't my name on the business accounts?" she asked one night about 3 months ago. "Because you're not on the business license," I explained. "Dad left everything to me. The lawyers said it was cleaner this way for tax purposes. So I'm just your wife, not your partner. You are my partner, in everything that matters." But that answer wasn't enough anymore. She started asking about life insurance policies, retirement accounts, the value of our house, said she wanted to understand our financial picture better. Made sense at the time. Couples should talk about money. Then came the lawyer consultation she called informational meetings. The way she'd disappear for hours on Saturdays, claiming she was shopping or visiting her sister. Her sister Kelly called one evening looking for her, said they hadn't talked in weeks. The arguments got more frequent, usually about small things that escalated into bigger things. I'd suggest we take a vacation. She'd accuse me of trying to control her schedule. I'd ask about her day. She'd say I was interrogating her. Every disagreement felt like it was being documented somehow. But the strangest part was how she'd sometimes repeat herself. Same phrases, same emotions, like she was giving multiple takes of the same performance. I'd respond differently each time, trying to understand what she wanted to hear, but nothing seemed to satisfy her. Kelly mentioned at a family barbecue that Stephanie had been asking about my relationship with my dad, specifically about how he treated my mom during arguments. My dad never raised his voice to anyone, barely spoke above a whisper his whole life. But Stephanie seemed interested in painting a different picture. "Your family has anger issues," she told me after we got home that night. "Based on what?" "I can see it in you sometimes. The way you clench your jaw when you're frustrated." I touched my jaw, hadn't realized I was doing it. The truth hit me on a Tuesday morning in September. I was reviewing the security footage from the previous weekend, checking timestamps for an insurance claim on a damaged delivery truck. Standard procedure, just documenting when each vehicle left the yard. But I clicked on the wrong folder. Instead of the warehouse cameras, I opened the house files. 3 months of archived recordings, automatically saved and organized by date. I was about to close it when I saw Stephanie's name in the file directory. She'd been reviewing the footage, downloading specific segments, creating her own copies. My chest got tight. I scrolled through the access logs, seeing her username logged in at strange hours, 2 in the morning while I was asleep. Mid-afternoon when I was at work, she'd been systematically going through weeks of recordings, selecting specific conversations and arguments. I opened one of the files she'd downloaded. It was from a fight we'd had about her spending. In the original recording, you could hear the full context. I'd come home to find she'd bought a $1,500 purse without mentioning it. I asked if we could discuss big purchases beforehand, especially since we were reinvesting most of the business profits back into equipment. The conversation started calmly. I explained my concerns about cash flow. She got defensive, accused me of treating her like a child. Things escalated from there. By the end, we were both frustrated and saying things we shouldn't have. But the file she'd saved only captured the last part. My voice, raised in frustration, saying she was being irresponsible with our money. Her crying, asking why I was being so cruel. None of the context that led to that moment. None of her initial aggression or accusations. She was editing our fights. I spent the next hour going through every file she'd accessed. The pattern was consistent. She'd save the parts where I sounded angry or unreasonable, cutting out everything that showed her role in escalating things. Arguments that lasted 20 minutes were compressed into 2-minute clips that made me look like a controlling husband who screamed at his wife for no reason. The security system I'd installed to protect my family was being used against me. I sat in my office until almost midnight, watching months of my marriage played back in fragments, seeing how carefully she'd constructed her narrative, how deliberately she'd provoked certain reactions, always positioning herself where the cameras would catch her looking vulnerable. She was building a case. For what, I wasn't sure yet, but it was methodical, professional, like someone had coached her on exactly what evidence she'd need. I didn't confront her that night, didn't let on that I knew. Instead, I went to bed and lay there listening to her breathe, wondering how long she'd been planning whatever this was. By morning, I'd made a decision. If she wanted to play games with recordings, I'd let her. But I was going to make sure I had all the footage, not just the edited highlights she thought would serve her purposes. 3 weeks later, Stephanie filed for divorce. I came home to find the papers on the kitchen counter, next to a note saying she was staying at Kelly's house until I moved out. The petition was 12 pages long, detailed accusations of emotional abuse, financial control, and creating a hostile living environment. It painted me as a manipulative businessman who used his success to intimidate and isolate his wife. I called my attorney, James Morrison, who'd handled my dad's estate and various business matters over the years. He read through the filing while I waited in his office, occasionally making skeptical noises. "She's asking for half the business," he said finally, "plus the house, both cars, and monthly support payments that would basically amount to your entire salary. Can she do that? If she can prove these claims, maybe. Tennessee's not a no-fault state when it comes to asset division. Abuse changes everything." He flipped through the pages. "Says here she has video evidence." My stomach dropped. "What kind of video evidence?" "Doesn't specify, but she's claiming you threatened her on multiple occasions, that you controlled her access to money, that you isolated her from family and friends." He looked up at me. "Any of this true?" "None of it." "Good. Then we fight it. But Richie, I need you to understand something. Even false accusations can be expensive to defend against. And if she has recordings that sound bad out of context..." He didn't need to finish. I knew exactly what recordings she had. The next week, I tried to access our joint accounts to pay some business expenses. The accounts were frozen. Stephanie's attorney had filed an emergency motion claiming I might hide assets or retaliate financially. The judge granted it pending a full hearing. I had to borrow money from the business account to pay my own lawyer. Stephanie's strategy became clear over the following month. She'd hired Patricia Coleman, one of Memphis's most aggressive divorce attorneys. Coleman specialized in high-asset divorces where emotional abuse was claimed. Her track record was impressive and expensive. They demanded mediation before trial, confident they held all the cards. The session was scheduled for a Friday afternoon at Coleman's office. Stephanie sat across from me wearing makeup that emphasized shadows under her eyes, like she hadn't been sleeping. She avoided eye contact, playing the part of the traumatized wife perfectly. Coleman spread documents across the conference table like she was dealing cards. "My client has documented a pattern of escalating abuse over the past year," she announced. "We have recordings that clearly show Mr. Williams using intimidation tactics and verbal threats to control my client's behavior. We'd like to review those recordings," Morrison said, "in due time. First, let's discuss a fair settlement that acknowledges the trauma my client has endured." Their offer was everything. The business, the house, my dad's Rolex that Stephanie had always claimed was too ostentatious. Even our dog, Cooper, who'd never shown any preference for her over me. In exchange, I'd get to walk away without a lengthy trial that would air private family matters in public court. "That's not a settlement," Morrison said. "That's extortion." Coleman smiled. "That's justice for a woman who's been silenced for too long." The mediation failed. Trial was set for 6 weeks later. During that time, Stephanie played her role perfectly. She started therapy for trauma recovery, got a restraining order that forced me to move into a hotel, posted carefully worded social media updates about finding her voice and breaking free from toxic relationships. Meanwhile, I spent every evening in my hotel room, going through our security footage with a legal pad and stopwatch, documenting every conversation she'd recorded, noting what she'd included and what she'd edited out, building my own timeline of our marriage's collapse. The evidence was overwhelming, but I needed to present it right. One chance to show the judge what really happened. One opportunity to prove that the victim in this story wasn't who everyone thought it was. 2 days before trial, Morrison called with bad news. They've filed additional evidence, video footage of you threatening to make her pay if she ever left you. I closed my eyes. I remembered that argument. We'd been fighting about her sister's wedding, where she'd told everyone I was too busy with work to attend. I'd been frustrated, said some things I regretted, but threatening her wasn't one of them. I need to see it, I said. We met at Morrison's office that evening. He pulled up the video file on his laptop. There I was, standing in our living room, pointing at Stephanie and saying, "If you walk out that door, you're going to pay for it. I promise you that." It looked terrible, sounded worse. My face was red with anger, my voice raised and aggressive. Stephanie cowered against the wall, tears streaming down her face, looking genuinely terrified. But I remembered what happened next. After I'd said those words, I'd immediately apologized. Explained that I meant she'd regret missing her sister's wedding, not that I'd retaliate somehow. We'd talked it out, ended up laughing about how we'd both overreacted to wedding stress. "Where's the rest?" I asked. Morrison paused the video. This is what they submitted, about 90 seconds of footage. The argument lasted 20 minutes. She's cut out everything that came after. Can you prove that? That's when I realized Stephanie had made a crucial mistake. She'd been so focused on creating incriminating clips that she'd forgotten something important. I had access to the original files, not just the copies she'd downloaded and edited, but the raw footage from the security system's main server. She doesn't know I kept backup files, I said. Everything gets automatically stored on an external server for insurance purposes. She's been working with the local recordings, but the complete versions are still archived off-site. Morrison leaned forward. Complete versions of what? Every conversation she recorded, every argument she edited, the full context she's been cutting out to make me look abusive. I spent the next day retrieving files from the backup server. What I found was better than I'd hoped for. Not only did I have the complete recordings of every argument, but the system had also captured footage of Stephanie preparing for these confrontations. I watched her practice different emotional reactions in front of the bathroom mirror. Saw her reviewing previous recordings and taking notes on which phrases got the strongest responses from me. There was even footage of her calling someone, probably Coleman, and discussing which clips would be most effective in court. But the most damaging evidence was a conversation I'd forgotten about entirely. 3 months ago, when Stephanie thought I was at work, she'd had a friend over. They'd discussed her divorce strategy in detail, including her plan to make him look unstable and get everything he thinks he deserves. The key is getting him angry on camera, she'd told her friend. Make him say things that sound threatening. Judges eat that stuff up, especially when it's a successful businessman against a scared wife. Her friend had asked if she felt bad about lying. It's not lying if he really is controlling, Stephanie had replied. I'm just helping the truth come out in a way people will understand. The conversation lasted 40 minutes. She'd laid out her entire plan, from the initial recordings to the final courtroom performance. Even discussed how much she expected to get in the settlement and what she'd do with the money afterward. I had it all on tape. Her conspiracy, her manipulation, her deliberate fraud. The only question now was how to present it without looking like I'd been spying on my wife. Morrison had an answer for that too. She opened this door when she submitted edited recordings. We're just providing the complete context that proves those recordings were deliberately falsified. The trial started on a Thursday morning in October. Judge Patricia Williams presided, no relation despite the name. She had a reputation for fairness, but little patience for games or manipulation. Coleman presented Stephanie's case first. She painted a picture of escalating abuse, supported by carefully selected video clips that made me look like a monster. Each recording was damning out of context. Me yelling about money, me slamming a door during an argument, me telling Stephanie she was being unreasonable and selfish. Stephanie took the witness stand wearing a conservative dress and minimal makeup, playing the part of the recovering victim. She spoke quietly about feeling trapped in a marriage with someone who controlled every aspect of her life. She described living in fear, never knowing when I might explode over some minor issue. He installed those cameras everywhere, she testified. Said it was for security, but it felt like surveillance, like he was watching my every move. Coleman played the threatening video again. Can you tell the court how you felt when your husband said these words to you? Terrified, Stephanie whispered. I knew he meant it, that he'd find a way to hurt me if I tried to leave. The performance was flawless. Even I almost believed it, watching from the defendant's table. She'd practiced this testimony for months, perfecting every gesture and inflection. But then it was our turn. Morrison started slow, asking basic questions about the security system, when it was installed and why. He established that I'd paid for it, installed it myself, and maintained full administrative access to all recordings. Mr. Williams, he said, have you reviewed the video evidence submitted by the plaintiff? I have. And do you recognize these recordings? Yes. They're edited versions of longer conversations that took place in our home. Coleman objected, claiming I was trying to discredit her client's evidence without proof. Judge Williams allowed Morrison to continue. Your Honor, Morrison said, we'd like to submit the complete, unedited versions of these same recordings, all archived automatically by the security system's backup server. That's when Stephanie's composure first cracked. She looked at Coleman with panic in her eyes. They'd prepared for me to deny the accusations, maybe claim the recordings were taken out of context. They hadn't prepared for me to have the complete conversations. Morrison played the first full recording, the threatening exchange about her sister's wedding, but this time including my immediate apology and our reconciliation afterward. The complete context made it clear I'd been talking about her missing a family event, not threatening retaliation. As you can see, Morrison explained, the defendant's words were taken from a longer conversation where he clarified his meaning and apologized for his tone. The plaintiff's version deliberately removes this context. We went through each recording methodically, every edited clip followed by the complete conversation, every accusation of abuse followed by evidence of manipulation and provocation. But the real bombshell came when Morrison played the conversation Stephanie had with her friend, her own voice discussing her strategy to make him look unstable and get everything he thinks he deserves. The courtroom went dead silent. Judge Williams asked to review the recording herself, listening to the entire 40-minute conversation where Stephanie laid out her plan to frame me for abuse I'd never committed. Coleman tried to object, claiming the recording was inadmissible because it was made without her client's knowledge. But Morrison was ready for that too. Your Honor, the plaintiff has spent this entire trial submitting recordings that were made without my client's knowledge. She can't claim that evidence obtained through secret recordings is valid when it supports her case, but invalid when it contradicts her story. Judge Williams agreed. The recording stood. Your Honor, I said, standing up after Morrison finished his presentation, I'd like to add something. Judge Williams nodded. The courtroom was still processing what they'd heard. Stephanie sat frozen at the plaintiff's table, her carefully constructed victim persona crumbling as the full scope of her deception became clear. My wife walked into this courtroom with edited videos, fake tears, and a story designed to destroy my reputation and steal everything I've worked for. She thought I was too stupid to realize what she was doing. I pulled out a folder containing printed screenshots from the security system logs. These documents show every time she accessed our security recordings over the past 6 months. Every file she downloaded, every conversation she edited. This wasn't a desperate woman documenting abuse. This was a calculated fraud. Stephanie finally looked at me, and for the first time in months I saw the real her. Not the victim act, not the frightened wife performance, just raw anger that her plan had failed. She forgot one important detail when she planned this whole scheme, I continued. I'm the one who installed those cameras. I'm the one who set up the backup systems. I'm the one who maintained full administrative access to every file she thought she was stealing. Judge Williams reviewed the access logs, comparing them to the dates of the arguments in question. The pattern was undeniable. Stephanie had systematically gathered evidence, edited it to remove context, and built a false narrative of abuse. Furthermore, I said, the recording of her discussing this strategy with her friend proves this was premeditated fraud. She didn't document abuse, she manufactured it. Coleman tried one last objection, but Judge Williams had heard enough. Counselor, your client has submitted deliberately falsified evidence to this court. That's perjury, and it's contempt of court. I'm dismissing this petition immediately. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through the silent courtroom. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Judge Williams referred Stephanie's case to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution. Perjury and evidence tampering were felonies in Tennessee. The legal community was small enough that word spread quickly about the lawyer who'd tried to build a case on fabricated evidence. Coleman's reputation took a major hit. 2 other high-profile clients dropped her firm within a month. Stephanie faced not only the collapsed divorce case but also mounting legal bills from both sides. Judge Williams ordered her to pay my attorney fees as punishment for the fraudulent filing. The frozen accounts were released back to me within a week. I moved back into our house while Stephanie stayed with her sister, avoiding the media attention that followed the story. A local reporter had been in the courtroom and wrote a detailed article about the case that got picked up by several legal publications. Stephanie's sister Kelly called to apologize. She'd suspected something was wrong when Stephanie kept asking leading questions about my behavior, but she'd assumed it was normal marital stress. The elaborate deception had shocked everyone who knew us. Cooper was happy to see me back home. He'd never been confused about where his loyalty belonged. I sold the house 3 months later and bought a smaller place outside Memphis, closer to the warehouse. Kept the security system, though. Old habits die hard, and the trial had taught me the value of complete documentation. Not paranoia, just preparation. Stephanie eventually pleaded guilty to reduced charges to avoid prison time. She got probation, community service, and a permanent criminal record that would follow her for the rest of her life. Her dream of law school died with her felony conviction. Her plan to take everything I'd built ended with her losing everything she'd hoped to gain. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal or the legal fees or even the months of stress. It was realizing how long she'd been planning it, how carefully she'd studied my reactions and vulnerabilities. But sometimes the people who think they know you best are the ones who underestimate what you're capable of when you're pushed too far.